Shavua Tov, Umazal Tov. I'm sorry this shiur I wasn't able to do it live. I had an unexpected travel, but here I am, Be'ezrat Hashem, so that we can continue our journey. So just as a recap, as to what we have learned in the last shiur, we addressed and discussed the influence our surrounding has on us and the reason behind it. And we said that when a person usually thinks that it's okay to behave a certain way, so he tend to think that or he's smarter than everybody else. And then Shlomo HaMelech tells us or reminds us that there's always someone smart in our surrounding that will call us on our misbehavior. Or if a person rises, and as he rises, he forgets that the reason why he grew, he became so powerful, so inspirational, so great, is because of his makom, because of where he belongs, or what brought him there. So Shlomo HaMelech tells us then this person has to be careful of the surrounding of the fools, and we brought the Rambam that says that most people behave in a foolish way. So a person has to be careful of the people around, because those people, as they see this person rise to greatness, start awakening jealousy, envy, resentment, and that exposes the person to lashon hara, ayin hara, kin'ah, etc. And we then explained that the way to protect ourselves from this exposure of this negativity, of this darkness that surrounds us, it's through Moshe Rabbeinu. And we explained why. The Moshe that's in us has to be able at all time to stay Moshe. And the greatness of a person defined as Moshe Rabbeinu is what the Torah, what Hashem himself identifies Moshe as, Anav Mikol Adam, the most humble person in humanity. So we need to dive into that concept of Anava, humility. The simple definition of humility, or what people tend to believe what humility is to shy away from the recognition of the good or the positive outcome that comes out of our actions from the people. So you want to stay low-key. And the emet is that is definitely a way that brings a person to humility. The Maharal explains, and the Rambam also explains in Sefer Moreh Nevuchim, that a person, in order to learn to become humble, he needs to make sure that he doesn't let the fame, he doesn't let his good accomplishment or the applauding of the people that see his accomplishment get to his head, and therefore should not be so exposed and under the spots. This is not humility. This is what brings to humility. That's what the Rambam teaches us. The Maharal dives a little deeper in that concept of Anava and explains something beautiful. He says Anava comes from the word la'anot, to answer, to respond. And he explains that one of the signs that a person has Anava, has humility, is when a person knows that at the end of time, he will have to answer for all his actions. And when a person realizes that his actions after 120 years have consequences and impact on the entire creation, on the entire Hashem's will, an impact kiviyachol on Hashem's will directly. And a person with this behavior has in him Anava, has in him humility. Because he realizes how small he is in Hashem's will, yet also makes him realize that he is at the service of God's will. So when a person knows that basically he's not at his own service, and whatever he does, he doesn't do for him, but for the greater good, we're going to call it the greater good. So that puts in perspective how much ego he's allowed to have, or how much space and place he's allowed to take in his life, and in the life of others, obviously. And the Maharal continues in Netivot Anava and says something very puzzling. He says the Anava, humility, stands from simplicity. So one may think that when a person lives a simple life, whatever the definition of simplicity is, so that makes a person a humble person. But if that was the case, we all know that simplicity is a subjective term. Not everyone defines simplicity the same way. Yet Anava, as our rabbis call it, Gdola min agdolot. It's the greatest trait, the greatest attribute a person can have in his life. The greatest accomplishment a person can have in his life is to get to a place where he is known, not only known, but where he behaves with humility. So to understand better, the Maharal develops this concept and says that the Anava, the humility, the simplicity, right, that reflects or expresses the trait of humility in a person, is not a midah, is not a trait that is rigshi, that is sensitive. It doesn't come from the same place in the nefesh of a person. Usually, all traits in a person comes from the nefesh, comes from the instinct, the koach hamit'orer, like the Rambam calls it in Shmoneh Prakim LeHarambam, in his book, in his introduction to Pirkei Avot. So all traits, all the midot, come from that place of the nefesh. However, says the Maharal, there is one midah that comes from the sechel, that comes from the intellect, that comes from the mind, and it's the anava. The reason being that for a person to be able to be anav, to be able to be humble, he needs to rise and raise himself and elevate himself intellectually to such a level where he realizes that as much as he knows, he really doesn't know anything. And as much he thinks he can control through his mind, he really is far from controlling everything. And that brings a person to realize how small in the scope of the world, of the creation, he is. Also, with the anava, with the intellect, a person can see things from many different ways, can analyze a situation from very different angles. That also, says the Maharal, allows a person to develop and grow his humility. But the Maharal continues and says that the definition of simplicity is greater than just being simple. The definition of simplicity, says the Maharal, is basically being so simple that you are fully capable to adapt to any situation a person faces, free from any hagbalot, from any limitations, emotional limitations, intellectual limitations. A person that is able to be, that is so free and so independent from certain traits that would dictate a certain behavior, is what the Torah calls a Anav, a humble person. To be humble means to be able to connect to everyone, understand everyone, adapt to every situation, and that through the control of the intellect. And it is beautiful to see that in Moshe Rabbeinu. If we learn the Rambam in the 13 attributes of Hashem, you can find it in Masechet Sanhedrin, in the Pirush HaMishnayot of the Rambam in Masechet Sanhedrin. And one of the attributes, the Rambam explains who Moshe Rabbeinu was. And he says that Moshe Rabbeinu was kulo sechel. He was fully intellectual. He was able to rise to such a level that the emotions were no factors anymore. Everything that he saw, a situation that he faced, he was 100% intellectual. All sikhli. Which means that he was able, through his intellect, to make sense of every emotions or every limitations he had emotionally, and understand it and fight it and untie this emotional knot that would force him to behave a certain way or refrain him from engaging in certain situations. Kulo sechel, fully intellectual. And this is to be simple, says the Maharal. A person, if you want to know if he's a Anav, you need to see if the person is able to really adapt, to really connect to everyone and every situation. To be able to tap into the Moshe Rabbeinu that's in us means to confront all our limitations, all our fears, our doubts, the traits that dictate who we are, our behavior. A person will say, well, what do you want? I'm an angry person. Or what do you want? I'm a lazy person. Or what do you want? I'm a fearful person. He's a person that basically stops himself from possibly becoming a humble person. Someone that says, well, this is how I am. This is who I am. Cannot be humble. All these limitations that stop us is really what locks and imprison the Moshe Rabbeinu that lives in each and every one of us. The simplicity can be tested every day of our lives. every situation we face, we have the choice to engage for the best of that situation, rebond, reconnect for the greater good, or let our emotions take over our actions and decide whether we're going to speak Lashon Hara, whether we're going to engage in a machloket, whether we're going to hurt someone. And by default, shuts down and chokes this neshama that's in us, the will of Hashem that's in us, that needs to shine, that wants to shine. Rabotai, it is our obligation to take the time and reflect on how simple do we really are. Because if we think we can emulate this great midah, this great trait of Hashem that is called the Anava, it's not possible if we want to protect our limitations. The limitations that keep us in a comfort zone, in a place where we feel safe, instead of really blossoming. Anava, humility, is compared to water. Water doesn't have any structure. From water, you can make an ice cube, or you can turn it into air. The water finds its way everywhere. The water is able to always go down to the lowest level possible. A humble person is someone that can be such a vital source of life, just like the water, but find his way all the way down to be able to bring life inside the earth to a little seed in order for the seed to blossom. The greatness that lives and resides in each and every one of us, by that neshama, the definition of neshama is the anava. This neshama that shines inside of us gives us the ability not to get stuck in our own place, in our own position, but to feel secure, strong, in control, to dive in lower places, to go and help the ones that need, but also to rise, just like that water that turns into air, that rises to form ananim, to form clouds for the water to come down. A humble person is somebody that can have a full circle. Someone that through his intellect, through the clarity of his mind, can understand people, can find the proper language to speak to each individual. Not to everyone you can speak the same way. With certain people you will speak with more fear, with others with more relaxations, with others you're going to laugh, with some you're going to be firm. But to be only one way or the other is wrong. This stiffness of our behavior, of our nefesh, that according to the Rambam, is the second nature people develop through their life in order to protect themselves and secure their comfort level, is a prison, is the golden prison we build around ourselves. Moshe Rabbeinu was a shepherd. Moshe Rabbeinu was an Egyptian. Moshe Rabbeinu was the son-in-law of Yitro, the greatest worshipper of idolatry. Moshe Rabbeinu took us out of Egypt. Moshe Rabbeinu spoke to Hashem. Moshe Rabbeinu confronted the Meragelim, confronted Korach. Moshe Rabbeinu confronted Amalek. But it's that same Moshe Rabbeinu that was so sensitive to carry a little goat that was thirsty and tired on his shoulders. All these different facets of our neshama are strengths that each and every one of us have. So, not only that through the Anava, we unlock our potential, open up ourselves to the greater us that lives inside of us, but it also enables us to be understood better by the people around us. Because if you're an Anav, if you have humility, and your yes is your yes, and your no is your no, and your maybe is a maybe, then you will never underestimate anyone. You will never belittle anyone, because you will always be able to put the person's glasses, understand that person and speak his language, to see the pain, or to see how to elevate that person. On the other end, you're never going to forget that the secret ingredient to greatness is the Anava. So the people around you will not need to envy you. They will not need to resent your greatness or your growth. They will be in awe. They will say, look at this person. Look how humble he is. Look how accessible he is. Look how nice he is. Look how he understands me. He can be sitting like Zechariah. He could be sitting as a Navi, as a Dayan, as a rabbinical judge. He can be in the court of the king, the son-in-law of the king. Yet, with Anava, he can sit with me, a simple person, take the time to understand me, to listen to me. So what's stopping us? Rabotai, what's stopping us is because we misunderstand the true definition, number one, of Anava, of humility. Humility is not to hide. Hiding or shying away from the spotlight is what helps a person to become humble. But the true trigger of the humility that lives in each and every one of us is this ability through the intellect, through clarity of mind, through this Torah that we embrace, through that wisdom, that abundance of knowledge that we are exposed to every day, that the Torah is allow that fresh water to penetrate our nefesh, to penetrate our soul, to penetrate our wiring system, and enable us to understand ourselves so well that even if there is a narrow pipe in our pipeline, to understand what to do with it, instead of staying clogged and stuck with something that could be so simply resolved. This week, we're going to be entering the 3 weeks. The 3 difficult weeks where we commemorate, we remember, we mourn the destruction of Yerushalayim Yer HaKodesh, of the Bet HaMikdash. And we know that the second Bet HaMikdash was destroyed because of Sinat Hinam, because of free hate. This instinctive reaction of hate, of jealousy, that is never a good reason. It can never be justified. The Torah says it. Lo tisna et achicha bilvavecha. You're not allowed to hate your fellow. You're not allowed to have hate in your heart. So if the Torah says it, it means that nobody can really hate. We can have bad feelings, we can feel hurt, we can feel disappointed, but no hate. So the tikkun, to be able to fight that hate that's still a cloud that is around our head until today. If we don't have the Bet HaMikdash today, it's because that hate has not been solved. The tikkun hasn't been done. So our obligation to contribute to solving this problem is to be aware, to take responsibility, to be a humble person, to merge the mind, to merge the knowledge with our purpose, the great purpose of serving the will of Hashem. But to also enable that Anava, that humility, to come out by learning to become simple, by learning to free ourselves from all those limitations that we've put in place in our lives, on our own. Chachamim tell us, "B'makom she'ata motzeh gadluto, sham ata motzeh anvatanuto." Our rabbis tell us, Hashem, where you find His greatness, that's where you find His humility. Let's become great. We deserve to be great. We deserve gadlut. We deserve to be gedolim, to be big. By turning on this intellectual instinct that resides in each and every one of us, that's called humility. I love you all. And I apologize for this recording shiur versus the live shiur, but I'm sure you can understand that I was not able to make it due to the time. It's actually right now 2:23 a.m. Shavua tov, mazal tov. I love you all.